Hey everybody, this is Kevin McFarland from The Art of Emergency Nursing, and you're listening to 30 Days to Being a Badass ER Nurse. In the next 30 days, I'm going to give you some quick tips and tricks to help you be a better ER nurse. And of course, as always, it's not just me you're going to hear from. I've recruited some of my friends to give you some of their tips and tricks so they can share their knowledge as well. So don't forget to subscribe so that you catch all the episodes. And if you find one of these tips and tricks are really helpful, give me a shout out on social media and share it with your friends. Let's get into today's tip. Welcome to day 23 of the 30-day podcast challenge, 30 days to being a badass ER nurse. For today, November 23rd, today is International Survivors of Suicide Day. So to honor those who have survived somebody who has committed suicide, I want to give you a little tip that'll help you screen and keep your suicidal patients safe. Now, you may be very familiar with the old scoring tool called SAD Persons. This is a scale that looked at things that would give people a score to try to figure out how likely they are to hurt themselves. Now, the tool was pretty good, but the tool's been recently updated, and I hadn't heard about it until just recently, so I want to share that with you. The SAD person scale is now the SAD persona scale, and we're going to talk about what that means. I'm going to go through each of the aspects of the SAD persona scale and tell you what each of the acronyms mean. The S in the SAD persona scale stands for sex, and what that is to remind you is that males are at a much higher likelihood of committing suicide. Males tend to take a more hard approach, what they consider a hard approach for suicide, and tend to try more lethal means. So that means they're oftentimes more successful than their female counterparts. The A is to remind you about their age. Patients from the age of 15 to 25 and patients over 59 years of age are at highest risk for committing suicide. So if your patient falls in those age ranges, you need to be extra diligent in evaluating them for suicidality. The D is for depression. Do they have existing or documented depression? If they have depression and hopelessness and seem absolutely hopeless, they're going to be at higher risk for suicide. The P stands for previous attempt. Have they previously tried to end their life? If they have, again, much higher risk, having attempted before. The E is to remind you that alcohol is a factor. Now, this is one I've struggled with, and maybe you have too. Oftentimes, people will come in intoxicated, and they'll make suicidal statements to their friends, their family, sometimes maybe just for attention, but sometimes it's what their intoxicated mind is thinking. Now, of course, as soon as they sober up, they're like, I was just messing around. I'm not really suicidal. But you buy the ride. You can't unring that bell. If you make your suicidal statements, you're going to be evaluated. Do they have R is to remind you about rational thinking loss. Are they psychotic? Do they have some kind of organic illness that's making their brain not clear? If their brain's not clear, that's going to make them at higher risk for suicide. S stands for social support. Or do they have social supports lacking? Do they not have social support? Do they not have a spouse, friends, family, people in their life? People who help remind them that they want to stay safe and live in this world. If they don't, again, much higher risk. If you tie that back to the age of over 59, oftentimes it's when people are either widowed or widowers. And again, higher risk for suicide. O stands for organized plan. Do they have an organized plan? If they have an organized plan that's a plausible plan, again, much higher risk. So I'll never forget a teenager who said that, I asked if he was suicidal. He said yes. And I said, okay, have you ever thought about how you're going to hurt yourself? And he goes, oh yeah, I've thought about it all the time. I said, okay, what are you going to do? He goes, I'm going to get a bomb. I'm going to buy a bomb and I'm going to blow myself up. Okay, he probably doesn't have access to a bomb. You never know, but probably not going to take that as serious, though you still take it serious. but it won't be as serious as I'll never forget an ER nurse who had a very organized, very specific plan. She was like, I'm going to take this med from the crash cart. No one's going to miss it. I'm going to give it to myself, and I'm going to die a cardiac death right there. And she would have, based on what meds she was talking about. If they have an organized plan, they're at much higher risk. N kind of ties back to S in that N stands for no spouse. Are they a widower? Are they a widow? Are they at high risk where they're living alone? And certainly it could be if they have any kind of history of depression or even alcohol abuse. Again, these risk factors just start multiplying very, very quickly. But no spouse, no social contacts, no history, all those things make a difference. A, this is the new one. This is accessibility. Do they have access to the means to which they are talking about killing themselves? Now, I'll tell you that it's a very different conversation having a conversation with somebody who has access to the means of hurting themselves. So if they have means to those access, if someone says, I'm going to shoot myself with my handgun that's in my house, they're at high risk for suicide. They have access to the means and the potential to potentially do it. The last is S, and it stands for sickness. Do they have any kind of either long-term, chronic, or acute illness that would make them feel like maybe life would be better off lived without them? If they do, again, much higher risk. Do they have that? Do they have anything like that going on? If they do have those kinds of acute or chronic diseases, they're, again, at a much higher risk for depression and much higher risk for suicide. And those risk factors just really start adding up. Now, speaking of adding up, in the old sad person scale, we used to score it up, and we'd score up anywhere from a low, a medium, or a high risk for suicidality. Now, with the new sad persona scale, they've taken away that scoring system per se, and have just kind of integrated the fact that you need to assess your patient if they have any of these risk factors. So I'll give you an example. Is that an elderly patient with dementia, who is physically ill would be a fairly high risk patient, but they wouldn't be as high risk as a patient who was 50 years old with a recently diagnosed with a chronic disease or an acute disease. These are going to be higher risk than your average patient. Well, I hope this sad persona scale, this update, helps you assess your suicidal patients. I want to tell you, as somebody who has survived suicide myself, and I, like many others, have, and I can personally tell you that there's nothing more devastating to a family than the loss of a loved one by their own hand. So take good care of those patients. Always take them serious. Always ask the questions, and always assess whether or not they're suicidal. You have to ask the questions to every single patient. You'd be surprised that when some patient out of the blue tells you yes, when you had no idea that that was even a factor of what they were dealing with. So you got to ask the questions, you got to evaluate the patients, and you got to keep them safe. It's critical. That will make you a badass ER nurse. That's my tip for today. Hope it helps. Have a great shift.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.